Let me tell you a little bit about Jeremy Gruber, who is an attorney. He is president of the Council for Responsible Genetics. And since 1983, CRG, which is the acronym, has represented the public interest and fostered public debate regarding the social, ethical, and environmental implications of the emerging genetic technologies. CRG is the only biotech public interest organization that is explicitly dedicated to examining the best science, interpreting the results, assessing the implications, and communicating them to a general audience and facilitating meaningful, measurable change in the area of responsible genetics. Jeremy Gruber is an expert on the issues, and he's also an expert on genetic, not only privacy, but genetic discrimination. And he's worked for over 15 years on genetic non-discrimination legislation at the state and federal level. And he's played a very important and a major role in the recently passed Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act, which was passed by Congress, as well as he's working on the subsequent regulations. He is the founder and executive committee member of the Coalition for Genetic Fairness, which is a group of 500 organizations that advocate for genetic non-discrimination protections on Capitol Hill. And most recently, he led the successful campaign to roll back the University of California, Berkeley's Bring Your Genes to Cal student genetic testing program. And this was widely criticized for its lack of due consideration for issues ranging from privacy protection for DNA samples and the data generated from them to the issues of improper informed consent and conflicts of interest. Jeremy is a prolific writer, and he has written on privacy issues ranging from direct to consumer genetics to forensic DNA databases. He is often consulted to testify before Congress. And he has been on radio, TV. We've had him on our show before, but this is very exciting to talk about this new issue. And actually, he had sent me, because we kept in touch, he had sent me the recently released Consumer Genetic Privacy Manual. And you can find that at his website at consulforresponsiblegenetics.org/genetic privacy. Jeremy, thank you so much for joining us all the way from New York.
Thank you for having me.
Well, you sure have had a wonderful career starting out with the ACLU. Why don't you just tell us about your evolution in privacy?
Sure. Well, I began my career right out of law school with the American Civil Liberties Union, and almost from day one, I was involved in working on state genetic privacy and discrimination legislation, which quickly led to working on federal legislation. And I carried that work through my transition to legal director at another organization called the National Work Rights Institute, where I was for a number of years, and worked on genetic privacy and discrimination issues throughout my tenure there, as well as many other privacy issues related to the workplace and online privacy. And in 2008, when we were able to successfully get GINA, the Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act, passed by Congress, I started looking for opportunities to continue work on genetic privacy and discrimination full-time. And CRG was luckily looking for a new leader, and here I am.
You're the fearless leader.
I am.
Well, Jeremy, is there something that kind of sparked your interest in genetic privacy? I mean, what was it that got you going? Was there anything special?
Well, I think so. I think that, when it comes to privacy, oftentimes it's difficult to gain interest in emerging issues because there's so many issues that we're constantly coming back to. And with genetic privacy in particular, early on, there were very few people who were even noticing that this was becoming a problem area, and certainly almost no one in the early days was even working on this issue. And it's an issue that has grown exponentially. It's going to continue to grow because this is a type of information that is becoming more and more widely used in a number of different contexts and will continue to do so in the future. In fact, the late Senator Kennedy likened the 21st century to the age of biology, and I think in terms of advocacy and in terms of privacy, it's concurrently going to be the age of genetic privacy.
Yeah. And you think about all these horror movies where you could, someone sees your genetic privacy and then gets rid of you because your genetics isn't right, or you're predisposed to something, or you can't get a house, or you can't get a car, you can't get a loan because you're predisposed to cancer or something that would show up in your genetics. So those are all the scary things that people think about, but it goes far beyond that, doesn't it?
Well, it certainly does. I mean, I think we're really only at the beginning of really realizing the different contexts that genetic information can be used to in terms of privacy, in terms of discrimination. And with genetics, of course, we certainly want to make sure that that research continues, that new breakthroughs are made. So as privacy advocates, we walk a very fine line between making sure that the research can continue, but with the appropriate safeguards to make sure that the public is protected.
Right. It's all that privacy by design that people are just not looking at. The scientists get so excited about genetics that they don't even really incorporate into the architecture of their scientific research or what they're doing the privacy implications. And that sounds like that's something that you guys are proponents of, right?
Well, I mean, that's true to a certain degree. I think scientists are most interested in furthering their research, and that's a good thing. They aren't policy experts. Privacy is not their primary concern. That doesn't mean they don't care about it, but oftentimes that is not what they're focused on, and that's why we need organizations and individuals to be raising these issues, and we need policymakers to be paying attention.
Right. So what exactly does the Council for Responsible Genetics do then?
Well, the Council for Responsible Genetics was actually founded many years ago in 1983. It was the first organization to begin working on genetic policy issues. And we work on a wide range of issues representing the public interest and fostering public debate about their social and ethical implications. Everything from the issue we're talking about today, genetic privacy and discrimination, to issues related to gene patents, to cloning, synthetic biology, genetically modified foods, and many others.
Wow. I think of that movie Multiplicity when you talked about cloning. Did you ever see that movie?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I did.
I love that movie. The copy of the copy, and that was great. But, I mean, there are many times I thought, wouldn't it be nice to have a clone that I could, take a vacation and let my other clone do some of the work that I have to do, but scary stuff. So what is genetic information? How do you define that?
Sure. Well, I mean, to give everyone an understanding of exactly what we're talking about, each of us carries a handful of genetic anomalies in our DNA that arise sporadically. They're inherited, or it's a combination of the two. And certain genetic tests have been developed to identify these changes, whether they're changes in chromosomes, genes, proteins. These tests have been developed for purposes of identifying these mutations or abnormalities that are associated with specific disorders in order to begin the process of trying to either develop a cure or develop a treatment. But genetic tests are really only one form of genetic information. The results of genetic tests that family members have undergone are also considered genetic information. The manifestation of a disease or disorder in your family or yourself, more commonly referred to as family history. It can also include a request or receipt of genetic services or participation in certain types of clinical research. Any real type of practice where the information created may indicate that the individual has some susceptibility to a disease or disorder.
Couldn't it also be more than just that? I mean, it could be like, I was thinking of, I was recently watching about Hitler and what he wanted to create, that Aryan nation where they had certain genetics, the blonde hair, the blue eyes, the certain, kinds of creation where you could create what you wanted somebody to look like. I mean, it could even be that, couldn't it?
Sure. Well, there's many. Once you become more specific, there are oftentimes many uses for ancestry testing, testing for a number of other clinical uses. And then, of course, there is testing for identity purposes, which is another form of testing, which is usually most often utilized by law enforcement in forensic DNA practices.
Right, right. And you and I were talking before the show started that in California, when you're arrested, the law enforcement can take your DNA just for being arrested, not even being convicted.
No, absolutely. I mean, I think for what we've seen with law enforcement's use of DNA is really typical of the growth that we've seen in the use of genetics generally. Originally, maybe 10 years ago, when forensic DNA databases were first beginning, they were initially created for felonies, people who had been convicted of felonies, and not just felonies, but felonies that were things such as rape, things such as murder, those types of particularly onerous crimes.
Yeah, violent, right.
Exactly. What we've seen now, though, is that as those DNA databases were being created, and they first started at the state level, and now we have a federal DNA database called CODIS, which is run by the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We've seen a massive expansion of forensic DNA databases to include not just people convicted of violent felonies, but people convicted of almost any crime. And now they're beginning to expand to include people who've been arrested, even if they're not convicted. And we're seeing new types of forensic DNA practices. Some of your listeners may be familiar with some of the recent attention around familial DNA searching that gained some attention in California, where law enforcement will find a DNA that is not an exact match to a database sample, and so they look for potential family members to see if they might be able to find a correlation. So there's been a number of different practices. We've seen a huge expansion of databases in particular, forensic databases in particular, not just at the state level, not just at the federal level, but even internationally. There's now 54 countries that have forensic DNA databases. There's an additional 20 countries that are planning forensic DNA databases.